In this video, I want to take a look at the rise of Old Poilievre, the leader of the Conservative Party of Canada, and how he has transitioned away from being the attack dog on Parliament Hill into your everyday working class stiff who visits factories and tells workers how he feels their pain and that he's going to make life a lot better for them when he becomes the Prime Minister of Canada. And he's managed to do this by basically ditching the navy blue suit, the glasses, changed his hairstyle, bought himself a couple of pair of jeans, a couple of t-shirts, and went out on the hustings. And I guess there is a measure of success has come with that transition, because in the polls today, he's sitting at 38%, the Liberals are at 28%, and the NDP at 18%. So if there was an election held today, he would form in a majority government. And that's got to be pretty scary for workers in general and for unionised workers in particular, because Poilievre, as we will see in a few moments, has not been friendly to unionised workers in the past. So when it comes to putting money into the pockets of workers and raising their standard of living and giving them a better wage and an income so as they can afford to buy a home, so that they can afford to retire with dignity, it is the labour movement are the ones that are the driving force behind that. It's the unions in this country and across the world that have actually built the middle class. And we've been constantly under attack from people like Poilievre, who every day of the week opposes what unions stand for. As a matter of fact, take a look at what he had to say here in the House of Parliament.
So you have, let's say, an automotive plant with 100 workers. When 51 of those workers want to be represented by the ABC union, all of them are represented by the ABC union, even those who are not part of the 51 out of 100, because of exclusive majority representation. A majority equals 100%, even if it really only equals 51%.
So here's a man that tries to pretend to steel workers in a factory that he's a champion and he's feeling their pain. But when he goes into Parliament, he does the exact opposite. He actually works against the labour movement. He works against workers getting unionised and getting organised such that they can increase their own standard of living and lift themselves out of poverty. But to fully understand where Poilievre is coming from, we need to take a look at this guy, Mike Harris. Remember him? Well, he brought the common sense revolution to Ontario in the mid-1990s. And believe me, I lived through that. I fought against Harris every step of the way because his agenda was not good for ordinary Canadians and for ordinary working class people.
I would now like all of you to join with Margaret and I in a pledge. And that pledge is to go back into our community starting tomorrow to do three things: to organize, to educate, and to resist.
For the Days of Action came out of the Mike Harris government and his common sense revolution. He cut welfare overnight. Many people found themselves homeless and on the streets. He stopped the subway expansion, housing co-ops and social housing, restricting the ability to organize, big cuts to workers' compensation, to education, axing employment equity, and of course, childcare.
Basically, he wanted to cut corporate taxes. He wanted to cut red tape. He did cut welfare payments by 26%, leaving all kinds of people destitute and particularly children. He cut funding to hospitals and to schools. And of course, he cut funding to municipalities, which resulted in the Walkerton crisis where 7 people died and 2,000 people got very, very sick from E. coli as a consequence of Harris cutting the funding to water testing in Walkerton.
The Mike Harris government policies, in your view, how did that contribute, if at all, to what transpired 10 years ago?
Well, I think Justice O'Connor's work through the Walkerton inquiry showed us quite clearly that there were some significant effects as a result of the cuts that were made to services during that period of time. Certainly the private laboratories failed us at that time with the notification that the government was warned about in terms of not having to warn both the Ministry of Health and Ministry of Environment at the time of the finding of adverse samples. That was huge. The policy of voluntary compliance was also very troubling. We were basically saying, we know what it takes to make water safe. We're simply not going to demand that you do that.
So you can see there's that's not an agenda that we want to be following now in the rest of Canada in the year 2023. But let's take a look at where Poilievre is coming from and where he is stealing a lot of the Mike Harris common sense revolution ideas. So we need to take a look at the centerpiece of Poilievre's common sense campaign. And it's basically twofold. It is cutting taxes, cutting mainly corporate taxes, and at the same time, he's banging on the drum about housing. And let us take a deeper dive into those two issues and see where is he actually coming from. Well, when it comes to taxes, he's very clever in that he goes into a factory of steel workers and talks about axing the tax, and tells these workers that he's going to put more money back into their pockets and their take-home pay by cutting premiums to EI, employment insurance, and the Canada Pension Plan. And of course, what this really is this is the agenda of the Chamber of Commerce and corporations in Canada who have to pay premiums for every worker in their workplace. These are premiums to increase EI protections if you lose your job. But more importantly, it's also small premiums such that CPP, such that when you retire, you'll be able to get a much bigger pension plan than you would have otherwise. So for the small amount of money that workers are being asked to put in right now, it will yield tens of thousands of dollars later on in their life when they retire. But Poilievre is coming today like a snake oil salesman, and he's telling these workers that he's going to put more money back into their pockets, when his real agenda is to put billions of dollars back into the pockets of the corporations and other businesses who don't want to pay the EI premiums and the CPP premiums. So he's really being disingenuous when he tells workers that he's going to put money back in their pockets. He's actually stealing money away from them later on in life when they desperately need it, believe me.
The government plans to raise EI premiums, that's the paycheck tax, on January 1st, along with other taxes. Why won't they cancel these tax hikes so Canadians can pay their bills?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to remind the Leader of the Official Opposition of something he should have figured out when he was the responsible minister. The CPP and EI contributions every working Canadian makes are how we all pay for our retirement, and how we create a safety net for every Canadian in case we lose our jobs. It is the height of irresponsibility for the Conservatives to suggest that we as a country stop putting money away for our retirement.
In addition, he talks about housing. Well, you know, when he was in as the Employment and Social Development Minister, he did absolutely nothing towards building social housing in Canada, anywhere in Canada. He never talks about social housing. He never talks about housing for co-op housing. He never talks about housing for people of low income or middle class Canadians or working class Canadians. No, he only ever talks about housing in the bigger picture, allowing land developers to move in and build massively sized homes that the working class and the poor and people on welfare and people living in poverty and homeless people will never find a home using the policies that Poilievre is coming out with. So once again, he is the proverbial snake oil salesman, selling a product to people that he knows full well is never going to deliver the social housing and the affordable housing that people need. But you know, when he was in Niagara Falls recently, he let his mask slip. We got to see the old Poilievre once again. He was trying to score points against the Liberals in comparing homes, the sale of homes and the price of homes in Niagara Falls, Canada, against Niagara Falls, US. And he went onto a street in Niagara Falls, Canada, and stood outside a woman's home, a small home, sitting on a half acre of land, and he referred to it as a shack.
A Niagara Falls woman woke up to an unusual surprise today. She found herself in an unexpected dispute with the leader of the federal Conservative Party. Al Sweeney has the story.
In this quiet Niagara Falls neighborhood, Asha Letourneau was a little miffed with federal Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre over what he called her house.
He called it a shack. A shack. That was a little embarrassing also, because it's not.
It cost $550,000 Canadian for a tiny little shack.
This is the guy that wants to be the Prime Minister of Canada. This is the guy that's trying to pretend to everybody that he's the everyday working stiff and he's the new kid on the block who understands and feels people's pain. No, he doesn't. This is all a charade in order to get himself elected in as the Prime Minister of this country.
See, for Pierre, it's all an act. He pretends to care, but he doesn't know how regular people live. He thinks if you live in a normal home, instead of a government-funded mansion like him, it's a shack. Pierre Poilievre has had government-funded dental care for almost all his adult life, but he wants to take it away from kids and their families who are just now able to get their teeth fixed. That's not the kind of respect that working people deserve. Pierre Poilievre doesn't want to help. He just wants power. And he will use that power the same way conservatives have always used their power, to make them richer and to take away every bit of dignity from hardworking Canadians.
So there's a message here for the Labour movement, and that is that we better get our act together. And I mean now, not 2 years down the road when the election takes place. You know, traditionally unions will think about elections 4 or 5 months out from the election and start mobilising and putting materials into the workplace and letting their members know where the various political parties stand. Well, if that's the approach that we take this time around, we're in for some serious trouble. This guy will get elected. He is making inroads into the Labour movement. Recent polls by Apicus data have indicated that more workers are now flocking over to Poilievre with his message because he's not being challenged right now in the media by anybody. I think what we need to do is to make sure that the Labour movement puts together a campaign that starts now, and we do it underneath the auspices of the Canadian Labour Congress, Federations of Labour and Labour Councils. And we need to sort of put money into a pool and start to get the message across to our members and educate them about just what exactly Poilievre stands for and how his policies will hurt workers into the future. That's a campaign that's desperately needed to happen almost straight away. Look, we know what happened with the Common Sense Revolution. We saw there were 200,000 people on the streets of Toronto protesting against Mike Harris and his cuts to welfare and hospital and education and his assault on social programs. We know that's coming at the federal level if Poilievre gets elected. Let's make sure that we stop that. We don't have to go through all that again. We've seen this movie once before. Let's make certain now that we go out now, today, and organise those 3.4 million unionised workers in Canada and their families, and make sure that they get the message long in advance of the next federal election, so we make sure that Poilievre never makes it into the Prime Minister's office in this country. You've been listening to Straight Talk with Sid Ryan.